Galloway fed 11 systems. It looked like what it was, a world with its sleeves rolled up. The great grain continents ran gold from horizon to horizon, cut by irrigation canals a century old and dotted with the silos of the granary towns, and above it all, every daylight hour of the growing season, flew the Growers' Air Cooperative, 400 crop aircraft, dusters and seeders and sprayers, flown low and hard by pilots who had learned the trade from their parents and would teach it to their children. Crop flying on Galloway was not aviation, as the rest of the galaxy understood it. It was performed at 3 meters altitude, under power lines, inside gusts, against deadlines set by weather that came off the Western Ocean like a freight schedule, and the co-op's pilots were, by the estimate of a fleet aviator who once flew an exchange season there and returned shaken, the finest low-altitude weather flyers in human space, none of whom had ever fired a shot. Joe Whitaker ran the co-op's flight operations from the tower at Cardin's Mill, 41 years old, third-generation duster pilot, air boss of the Harvest, a woman whose radio voice could talk a rookie through a collapsing downdraft without raising itself. Her winters were spent maintaining aircraft, her summers conducting 400 of them across a continent, around the storms, ahead of the blight, behind the rain. And her autumns belonged to the threshing. That was Galloway's word for it, the 6-week storm season when the Western Ocean emptied its temper onto the grain continents, fronts of slate-black cloud 1,000 kilometers long, hail and downburst and stubble-fire lightning marching east on a timetable the world's weathernet, and old Saul Bram at the central station could call to the hour, 2 days out. The whole harvest was a race against the threshing, run and won every year by people who treated the sky's violence as a colleague with a known schedule. The Oshan invasion fleet arrived in Galloway's high orbit on the 4th of autumn, 60 hours, by Saul Bram's board, before the season's first front made landfall. They could not have chosen worse. Nobody from off-world ever believed that, until it was demonstrated. The Oshan came for the one thing Galloway had, which was also the one thing they could not shoot. Their campaign into the sector was starving, the war's long supply lines had been mauled, and Galloway's granaries, holding the largest food stockpile within 40 light-years plus a harvest 2/3 gathered, would feed their entire offensive for 2 years. The logic was printed plainly in their operation order. Captured later, the objective is the harvest intact. Orbital fires are prohibited across all agricultural zones. Seizure will be executed by landing force, 40,000 troops, 300 drop ships, air wing in support, against a world whose defense flotilla had been decoyed coward the week before and whose garrison consisted of the planetary constabulary and whatever a farming population improvised. The ultimatum was broadcast on the morning of arrival, courteous as such documents go: surrender the granary cities, keep your lives and your farms, feed our war. Resistance would be met with force, precisely applied, the fine print necessarily conceding what everyone on the ground already understood, that the force could not include the only kind that wins wars from orbit, because scorched grain pays no armies. The Council of Galloway met that evening in the grain exchange at Cardin's Mill, the continent's parliament, in fact, if not in law, the co-op, the growers' associations, the canal boards, the constabulary, the silo cooperatives. The mood, witnesses agree, was not martial. It was professional, the mood of people confronting a large logistical problem on a deadline, which is the only mood Galloway had. Joe Whitaker spoke for the Air Co-op, and the exchange's minutes preserve her assessment, which became the campaign's plan entire. They need our flats to land on, our sky to fly in, and our grain intact, she said. So the flats will lie to them. The sky is ours in 6 ways they have never met, and the grain, well. She looked around the hall at 400 years of accumulated harvest sense. They have come to take the harvest, neighbors. I move, we give them one. The full Galloway experience. Every implement, every canal, every duster, and the threshing, which Saul tells me arrives in 58 hours. Exactly on schedule, like it always does, for us. The motion carried without dissent. The minutes record one addendum from the Constable General entered at the grower's insistence: prisoners eat at co-op tables. This is still Galloway. 58 hours is a long time on a world where the whole population knows how to work ahead of weather. The Oshan survey had done its work from orbit competently. Their landing plan, recovered afterward, designated 11 primary drop zones. All of them the obvious choices: the great dry flats and stubble plains near the granary cities, hard level ground rated for heavy dropships, helpfully free of obstruction. The survey's data was 3 days old. By the second dawn, it was fiction. The canal boards of 2 continents opened gates that had regulated irrigation for a century and performed, in 30 hours, the largest controlled flooding in Galloway's history. The drop zone flats went under a hand's depth of water, invisible from orbit beneath the standing stubble, converting hard pan into bottomless plough mud that would swallow a dropship's landing gear to the hull. The silo towns in the drop corridors emptied on the evacuation plans. Every granary community drills for fire season. And the survey beacons, the navigation net the ocean targeteers had thoughtfully logged as an asset, began, under the hands of the co-op's mechanics, to migrate, signals cloned, offsets introduced, the electronic ground truth of Galloway sliding gently sideways so that every precision approach the invaders had computed now ended somewhere the farmers had chosen instead. The air co-op armed itself with the contents of its own barns. Dust bombers, the heavy sprayers, loaded not with pesticide, but with the harvest's own byproduct, grain dust from the silo cyclones, the fine golden flour smoke that every farm child is taught to fear and respect, mixed with the metallic chaff the co-op cut overnight from irrigation foil. A cloud of it would choke an intake, blind an optic, and scramble a targeting return, and Galloway's silos held it by the 100 tons. And through it all, Saul Bram's weatherboard counted down, and the co-op's pilots slept in shifts under their aircraft, and Joe Whittaker stood in the tower at Carden's Mill, watching the western horizon, where the first front of the Threshing was assembling over the ocean, exactly as forecast, slate black and 1,000 kilometers wide. "Come on time," she told it, on the record, because the tower log caught it. "We have guests." The Oshan began their drop at dawn on the 3rd day, into the last calm hours before the front, which their own meteorologists had noted as a window, and Galloway's had spent 2 generations learning to distrust. The first wave, 90 drop ships aimed at 4 primary zones, rode down out of a clean pink sky in good order, tracked the migrated beacons through their final approach, and landed, with parade precision, in the wrong places, flooded ploughland dressed as hard pan. The great ships settled, sighed, and sank to their bellies, ramps opening onto a hand of water over a meter of mud, and the Oshan First Landing Force, the operation's armored fist, walked down into terrain that removed, in the first minute, every advantage mechanization had ever conferred. Vehicles bogged at the ramp lip. Powered armor sank to the knee joints. The far tree lines, from which defensive fire should logically have come, offered nothing at all, because Galloway had no intention of exchanging fire with 40,000 soldiers, and the silence, several Oshan officers recorded, was worse. Then the stubble smoke came. Controlled burns, the ordinary tool of every autumn, lit in patterns along the upwind field margins by farmhands who had been burning stubble since childhood, and the bogged landing zones vanished under amber smoke 100 meters deep, through which nothing could see, target, or navigate, and inside which the only sounds were engines straining in mud, and, distantly, unhurried, the working rumble of very large agricultural machinery. The second wave diverted, as the plan had known it must, toward the secondary zones and visual approaches, and came down through clearing air into the path of the co-op. 400 crop aircraft met them, unarmed, at 3 meters altitude and closing speeds, no interceptor doctrine addressed. Dusters do not dogfight. They crossed the dropship's final approach lanes, the way they crossed a bean field, low, exact, and in echelon, and laid the harvest's own dust, walls of golden flour smoke and glittering chaff, blooming across every glide path, and the descending ships flew into them because there was nowhere else, and intakes gagged, sensors whited out, and heavy-laden dropships on final approach discovered they were instrument blind in ground effect over terrain that lied. Some aborted to orbit. Some set down hard wherever physics chose, which was, the beacon offsets ensured, mud. The Oshan air wing, scrambling to sweep the sky of tractors, arrived to find their targets gone. Dusters at 0 altitude in home terrain do not present, and their own engines breathing gold. And then, on schedule, to the hour, with the second wave scattered across 100 kilometers of bog and smoke, the Threshing made landfall. No off-world Air Force had ever operated in the Threshing, for the sound reason that nothing about the Threshing was survivable to aircraft flown by reference to instruments and doctrine. The fronts came in at 100 knots of shear, ceilings dropped to the deck, downbursts hammered the flats like invisible artillery, and hail the size of thumb joints fell in swaths that Saul Bram's net tracked cell by cell in real time on frequencies the whole co-op shared. Galloway's pilots flew in it every autumn of their lives. Not through it, in it, with it, the way rivermen use a current. And, for the 31 hours of the first front, the sky over the grain continents belonged to 400 unarmed aircraft and the weather they had married. The co-op flew rescue, mostly, though the histories file it as combat. Dusters threaded downburst corridors to drop supply bundles to their own stranded evacuation convoys. Sprayers herded drifting Oshan paratroop sticks, scattered by winds their drop computers had refused to believe, away from the canal weirs and the silo machinery towards soft, survivable, extremely capturable mud. And where the Oshan air wing pressed, the dusters simply went where pursuit was lethal, to anyone without a lifetime's feel, into the hail shaft's margins, along the downdraft walls, at 0 meters through farmyards they knew. Gate by gate, and the pursuit either broke off or discovered, terminally, the difference. The Oshan lost 31 aircraft to the Threshing and its escorts. The co-op lost 4, all 4 crews walking away because their pilots put them down, as one wrote in the incident report, in Nella's East Paddock, where my cousin got me down in worse, the year of the double front. By the storm's second morning, the invasion's air component was combat ineffective, grounded, choked, hailed out, or committed to loiter budgets their fuel could not sustain, and the first and second landing waves, some 19,000 troops, were bogged in an amber-smoked, flooded, machine-haunted lowland whose defenders had yet to fire a weapon at them. Which is when the harvest machinery arrived in earnest, and the war on the ground became the thing the prisoners would describe for the rest of their lives. The combines came out of the smoke in cordon lines a kilometer wide. A Galloway harvest combine masses 60 tons, stands 5 meters at the header, and is, when advancing in line abreast with its running lights burning through amber smoke, the historians have settled on the phrase argumentatively persuasive. The combine cordons did not attack anyone. They herded, exactly as the exchange had planned it, lines of great machines, driven by farmhands on ground they had worked their whole lives, closing steadily across the bogged zones with floodgates opening behind them and grain walls, windrowed stubble berms thrown up by the balers, rising on the flanks, until each pocket of the landing force found its options narrowed, hour by patient hour, to a single dry corridor that led, every time, to the same destination, a co-op collection yard, floodlit, dry-floored, and staffed. The constabulary walked the corridors with shotguns, mostly slung. The real persuasion was thermodynamic. Soldiers who have spent 30 hours wading iron mud under hail, watching their vehicles disappear and their air cover choke on flour, arrive at a dry-lit yard where a row of trestle tables holds hot bread and stew served by the same community whose sky just defeated them. And the fight, prisoner after prisoner testified, went out of the columns at the smell of the bread. The addendum from the exchange's minutes was honored to the letter. Prisoners ate at co-op tables, were dried, doctored, and processed by silo clerks using grain intake paperwork amended in pen, quantity, condition, moisture content struck through and replaced with name, rank, dietary needs, and the amended forms hang framed today in the exchange, The great harvest of the war receded like any other. 19,000 troops surrendered across 4 days, in lots, to farmers. Total combat fatalities on the ground, both sides together, across the entire landing. 11, a number both species historians cite with a kind of awe. And Galloway's memorial lists them together without flags, under the stone lintel carved with the Constable General's report to the relief fleet, which had asked, arriving at last, where the battle had been fought. Everywhere, the report reads, with everything except what you mean. In orbit, the Oshan Command spent the storm-racked week discovering that its operation had been dismantled by an enemy it could not define, and its general, a capable officer whose captured war diary is taught for its honesty, worked the shrinking problem to its last square. Bombardment remained prohibited. Burned grain fed nothing, and the fleet's whole campaign now needed this harvest worse than ever. The landing force was gone, not destroyed. Worse, administered into captivity by agricultural machinery. Human relief squadrons were 7 days out. One option remained on the map: the Kettleback, the high northern plateau, dry, hard, above the canal country's reach, out of the flooded lowlands, the only terrain on the continent the water could not touch. His reserve, 12,000 troops and every drop ship still flying, was committed to it. A final concentrated landing to seize a defensible lodgment and bargain from strength, and his diary's entry that night permits itself one professional satisfaction. The plateau is beyond their irrigation. Whatever else these people command, they cannot flood a highland. He was correct. They could not flood it. They could harvest it. The Kettleback's cover, 1,100 square kilometers of standing dryland wheat, tall enough to hide a battalion and dense enough to blind ground sensors. The tactical asset his planners had circled as concealment for the landing force's assembly was, to Galloway, simply the North Harvest, scheduled for the following week. The exchange moved it up. Through the last night of the front's passage, under stormlight, 4,000 combines from 3 growers' associations converged on the plateau in the largest single harvest operation the world had ever run, headers running around the clock, and by dawn the Kettleback was 1,100 square kilometers of shaved golden stubble, flat, open, empty, and offering to any landing force exactly the concealment of a billiard table, every approach and assembly point naked to the horizon, with the entire crop already in the silos. The Oshan reserve was descending when the light came up over the harvested plateau. The general's diary records the abort order in one line, and the line after it made the diary famous. Landing cancelled. The terrain has been eaten. Note for the Staff College: if I live to teach, we assessed this world's weapons as nil. Its weapon is the calendar, and they hold every day of it. The withdrawal was orderly, because the Oshan were professionals, and the negotiation that preceded it was the strangest of the war, conducted between an invasion fleet and a grain exchange. The general's final transmission requested, in effect, terms for leaving, the return of his 19,000 against guarantees. Galloway's answer was drafted at the trestle table end of the exchange hall by the full council, and it entered the sector's diplomatic folklore before the relief fleet had even arrived to be astonished by it. "Your soldiers are fed, dry, and working," the reply said. "Those who volunteered at harvest wages under the prisoner labor conventions, several having proven quite good. They will be released per the conventions to the proper cartel authorities, which we are advised means the relief fleet, not you. You are, however, owed a statement of account, and Galloway settles its books. You came for our harvest. You will not have it as conquerors. But this world has never once in its history turned a hungry ship away, paid or unpaid, and the exchange has voted. 11 freighter loads of grain await your fleet at the orbital elevator, invoiced at market rates, 60-day terms, no surrender of anything required except the pretense that you had to do it this way. The Oshan fleet, campaign-starved, its landing force lost, its general possessed of exactly enough greatness to recognize the shape of the moment, paid list price for 11 loads of Galloway grain, hoisted them aboard under the guns of nobody, and left the system 2 days ahead of the human relief squadrons, having fired across the entire invasion of the best defended, undefended world in the sector, remarkably close to nothing. The invoice, 60-day terms, was paid in 40. The payment record hangs in the exchange beside the amended intake forms, and the growers of Galloway, who frame everything, framed the general's remittance note as well because it said, in careful human standard, paid in full, with the respect of the profession of arms for the profession of weather. Your prisoners' conduct reports are attached. You will be pleased. Should this war ever end, my quartermasters know your address. The relief squadrons made orbit to find the war over, the invaders gone, the harvest in, and nothing to relieve except the constabulary's paperwork backlog and the fleet's after-action assessment of the Galloway campaign, drafted by officers who kept having to stop and confirm the figures, reshaped doctrine across the human sphere. Agricultural worlds had been classed, always, as soft targets, no fleets, no fortresses, populations of civilians. The assessment summary, adopted nearly verbatim into fleet planning guidance, reversed the classification in one paragraph. A mature agricultural world, it reads, is a fortified position of continental scale, garrisoned by a population in daily technical partnership with terrain, weather, heavy machinery, and logistics, whose civil infrastructure, irrigation, aviation, burning, harvesting is convertible to area denial in hours, and whose defenders possess the one attribute no invader can bring, the calendar. Recommend all planning treat granary worlds as defended terrain of the first class. Recommend further that no estimate of such a world's garrison again return the figure nil merely because the garrison is dressed for work. Galloway itself absorbed its war the way it absorbed everything into the almanac. The Threshing's first front is still tracked each autumn by Saul Bram's successors at the central station, and its landfall hour is still called, these 100 years since, the guest bell. The co-op flies, 400 strong, and its flight school's graduation exercise, flown in storm season, is a course of gates that follows, precisely, the route of a certain rescue run through a certain downburst corridor, and the passing standard is the one Joe Whittaker set when she flew it first: arrive, deliver, return, and never once be interesting. She ran the co-op's tower for 20 more years. Refused every off-world decoration with the same form letter, harvest on, cannot attend, and accepted exactly one honor, local, unofficial, and permanent. The growers renamed the tower at Carden's Mill while she was up in it, working a front, and painted the new name across the tank stand where she would see it on final approach, the way she had seen everything her whole flying life, low, level, and dead ahead. The weather vane, it says, ask her which way the wind is. The lintel of the grain exchange at Carden's Mill carries the campaign's memorial, and visitors from the fleet academies who arrive every year by the shuttle load to study the Harvest War are always brought to it last, after the flooded flats and the kettleback and the framed intake forms, because Galloway believes in serving the main course at the end. It is not a war memorial in any style the academies know. It is a harvest board, the traditional kind, oak and brass, of the sort every granary town raises to record its great years, and it lists the autumn of the invasion in the standard format, line by line, as the exchange has always kept its books. Season, the threshing, arrived on schedule. Fields flooded, 1100. Stubble burned, per plan. Aircraft flown, 400, lost 4, crews none. The North Harvest, brought in early, all souls, all grain. Guests received, 19,031, fed, dried, returned in good order. Grain sold, 11 freighter loads, terms met early. Fallen of all flags, 11 names, and the sky over them every autumn. And at the bottom, where a harvest board traditionally carries the year's verdict in one line, the exchange voted the wording that has since traveled farther than any communique of the war, quoted in academies, parliaments, and, the growers note with particular satisfaction, in the Oshan staff college's own curriculum, attributed, correctly, to the world that taught it. A good year. Hard weather, strange guests, full silos. The land does not take sides, it takes measure. Come for the harvest however you like. It will be brought in by the people who know when the rain is due, and there has never been an army anywhere that knew.